Alright, today we are picking up with World War II, the Pacific Theater. So we're going to be looking at the US's war with Japan and how that was fought differently than our war in Europe against Hitler. So, Japan, why are they even a part of this? Well, their emperor, Hirohito, was more of their spiritual leader as opposed to being a really, truly effective leader. He's more of a figurehead, really. He's there, someone there that looks good. They come from a long line, but the real power is in the prime minister's job. Now, the goal for Japan at this time was to expand, just the same way that Germany was doing. They wanted more living space, and so they're looking to take over the Pacific region. Japan initially is going to make motions towards China. They take over the area of Manchuria from China, and because of that action, the League of Nations is going to reprimand them and say, oh, you can't do that. That's not what we're about. And so Japan, as a result, is going to quit the League of Nations. They say, well, fine, if we're no longer a part of it, then you can't tell us what to do. So they quit the League of Nations. Instead, what they're going to do is they're going to create their own organization called the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. And basically, they wanted to have dominance over the Pacific region. And so they're going to take over territory from Manchuria to Thailand, all the way down to Indonesia. And when they start doing this, they begin to have conflicts with other world powers, other colonial powers who had colonies in that region. And so we're going to see them starting to butt heads with other major European nations. Some of the nations that had colonies in the region included France. France owned French Indochina, which was made up of the countries of Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia. They also will butt heads with the Netherlands because the Netherlands owned the Dutch East Indies, which are very important because they had a lot of oil. They will also encounter British territories, British colonies. So Great Britain had India, they had Burma, they had Malaya. And then also the United States had several territories in the region. We had Guam and the Philippines and the Hawaiian Islands. So we are also very heavily involved as well. And most of us had many other colonies there too, but those are the major ones. Now, because the war started in Europe in the 1930s and officially started in 1941, France, the Netherlands, and Great Britain are very busy with Hitler, and so Japan makes their move and begins to take some of their territory. Now, the U.S. is not involved in the war yet at that point, and so the U.S. instead is going to cut off trade with Japan. We place them in an embargo. An embargo is where we're going to limit the kinds of things that we're going to trade with them. Now, the problem for Japan is that this is going to include oil, and they need oil in order to have an effective war machine. And they don't have their own native supply. They need to get it from somewhere else. And so their solution is going to be, well, we could either persuade the United States to lift its embargo, or they could go and take over the oil-rich Dutch East Indies. And that's what they're going to do. They're going to go take over the Dutch East Indies for its oil. Well, about this same time, Japan gets a new prime minister, and his name is Hideki Tojo. Now, he's going to meet with the emperor of Japan, and he promises that he is going to make attempts to make peace with the United States, but if the U.S. is unwilling to give Japan what they wanted, then Japan would go to war with the U.S. So, November 3rd, 1941, the U.S. ambassadors that were in Japan are going to send warnings back to the U.S. that Japan's planning some sort of surprise attack. They didn't really know what it was, but the president and the cabinet get this message by November 7th, so they knew that Japan was up to something. They just didn't know what exactly, but they knew that there was something in motion. By November 17th, 1941, the Japanese envoys who had been sent to Washington, and envoys are like representatives. So they are sent to Washington to ask for a removal of the trade restrictions, so that lifting the embargo so that they could have access to oil. So these Japanese representatives are in Washington. And the U.S. is going to refuse to lift the embargo and instead say, well, Japan needs to withdraw from China and from Indochina and get out of other people's business, sort of thing. By late November, FDR is going to send out a war warning to our military installations in Guam, Hawaii, and the Philippines, basically saying, hey guys, there's something afoot, let's just be ready, let's be aware. And so December 6, 1941 comes around, and the U.S. military is going to break the Japanese codes. And what we find out is that the peace envoy, those representatives or ambassadors that were sent to Washington to get us to lift the trade restrictions, were given orders to reject all U.S. proposals, no matter what it was. Even if we gave them oil, they were to reject it. It was to keep us occupied, to keep us busy, to keep thinking that Japan was willing to negotiate. And so they were told to keep us busy, to keep us thinking that they don't want to go to war with the United States. But we break the Japanese codes, and when we do that, we know that an attack is coming, but we just don't know where. So we know that an attack is coming, but we can't give specific instructions as to where it is. And we know that the Japanese are stalling for time, so we know that it's got to be something big. Now, we at this time were still neutral. We were not involved in the war. And so, unfortunately, the U.S. is put into the position of we can't make the first move. If we make the preemptory strike, if we are the first ones to make a move, based on the knowledge that we had, we look like the bad guys. Instead, we need to wait because of our policy of isolationism, which we got into in the 1920s and 30s after the war. We were basically had our hands tied. We couldn't do anything. So that's what's going to lead us to December 7th, 1941. And it's called A Date That Will Live in Infamy, based on FDR's speech that he gives after the attack on Pearl Harbor. And so the attack comes at Pearl Harbor in the Hawaiian Islands, which were not a state of ours at the time. Instead, they were a territory. And so at 8 o'clock, roughly 8 o'clock a.m., Japanese dive bombers are going to swoop over Pearl Harbor, and they'll be followed up by a little over 180 Japanese warplanes. And they are going to bomb the crap out of Pearl Harbor. And about an hour and a half later, by 9:30, there's very little damage done to Japanese planes, but the attack is over because they're running out of fuel. They have to return back to their ships and all that kind of stuff. Tremendous losses on the parts of the United States. 2,403 Americans will be killed. That included soldiers, sailors, and civilians. 1,178 will be wounded. 19 ships and 150 planes will be destroyed, and 250 planes will be damaged heavily. And this is just going to cripple the Pacific Fleet. The Japanese struck, and they struck hard, and they were very successful in doing their job. Only 29 Japanese planes are going to be lost. Now, the reason for the success of the Japanese is multifold. There's multiple reasons of why they were so successful. But basically, what it boils down to is that the Japanese capabilities were just far better than what the U.S. thought they were. We had no concept of the fact that they could actually get boats close enough to the Hawaiian Islands, close enough to our main base, without us knowing it. We didn't think they had the capability of sending planes the distance that they did. So for us, it was just beyond their capabilities. And so we didn't prepare for it. Instead, when the war warning came out, what we did is we're going to bring all our battleships into Battleship Row, because that way we could watch them. We were more concerned about the Hawaiian residents who were of Japanese descent doing some sort of sabotage to the planes, to the boats. So we wanted to watch for any spies, and we wanted to watch for any funny business that would be happening where somebody was maybe planting a bomb or something like that, or fiddling with the mechanics or whatever. We were not expecting a direct attack from Japan. We thought it would be something more subtle, like a spy coming in. And so, yeah, well, like I said, we have the battleships lined up in Battleship Row. We have the airplanes out on the airstrip, on the landing strips, wingtip to wingtip, so that way we could watch and make sure that they weren't being messed with. If they were in the hangars, we wouldn't be able to watch them as closely. But that's what's going to lead to us having so many casualties, and what's going to lead to us having so much damage. Well, Pearl Harbor is not the only place that they attack. Japan continues on that day, and they will also attack Guam and Midway, which were both U.S. bases. And they will also attack the city of Hong Kong and Singapore, which were British bases. And so they attack all those places on the same day. None of these other attacks are going to have quite the success rate that Pearl Harbor has for the Japanese. By December 8th, 1941, FDR is going to deliver his infamy speech to Congress, in which he asks the Congress to declare war on Japan. The Senate gives a unanimous yes that we will declare war, and the House vote will be 388 to 1. The lone dissenter of the vote is a woman named Jeanette Rankin. She's the first woman elected to the House of Representatives, and she's the only no vote. Now, she didn't vote no because she was weak and didn't want to go to war. Instead, she thought we should have done something before this to prevent this war from happening, to prevent not the war from happening, but to prevent the attack on Pearl Harbor from happening, because we knew that something was going to be coming. So Pearl Harbor had obviously a lot of mistakes made by the U.S., but there was also mistakes made by the Japanese as well. They didn't have a near perfect attack. They missed our submarines. They missed our aircraft carriers, which were out at sea at the time, so that's what saved them. They missed our oil supply, and they missed our repair ships. So they left us the means to fix ourselves, to get back into the fight. But it is a Japanese victory nonetheless. And within 6 months after Pearl Harbor, Japan is going to conquer a vast amount of land, far larger even than the German Empire is going to conquer. Although the Japanese Empire, most of it's water, because it's a lot of islands that they can't capture. But the amount of territory that they were controlling is much larger than even the German Empire was. So the Pacific Fleet for the U.S. is going to come under new command. By December 17th, just 10 days after Pearl Harbor, Admiral Chester Nimitz is going to be put in command. He is going to replace Admiral Kimmel, who had been in charge of Pearl Harbor, but he's going to get a lot of the blame for what happens. He kind of becomes the scapegoat for the whole incident. The Japanese will continue to expand even past Pearl Harbor, and December 23rd, Japan will take over the Wake Island, which is an American-held territory. By December 25th, by Christmas, Hong Kong will be defeated, and the Philippines will come under attack. Now, the Philippines were under the command of General Douglas MacArthur, and Douglas MacArthur was the guy who attacked the Bonus Army. If you remember the World War I vets who gathered around the White House hoping to get bonus money during the Depression, MacArthur's the guy who actually goes out and carries out the attack on them. Well, he is in command of about 80,000 American and Filipino troops, and they're going up against about 200,000 Japanese troops. And so it is going to be a lot of intense fighting for the island chain of the Philippines. In fact, it'll take 4 months of fighting just for the Japanese to take over the Bataan Peninsula. And it takes another month for them to take over the island of Corregidor. During this time, our troops are undersupplied. They are facing hunger and disease and constant bombardment. About 14,000 will be killed and another 48,000 will be wounded. At this point, General MacArthur will be ordered to abandon the Philippines. So he and his staff members leave, but they leave behind their soldiers. So he's forced to evacuate and ordered to evacuate and leave behind his troops. But as he leaves, he promises that he shall return. He says, I shall return. And he leaves his forces behind. So he's basically making them a promise that he's going to come in to help them. April 9th of 1942, the 75,000 American and Filipino troops who are left in the Philippines are going to surrender to the Japanese. And the Japanese will begin to take them on a death march. It's called the Bataan Death March. And they are forced to march over 100 miles. Thousands will be executed or will die of starvation and thirst before they reach the Japanese prison camps in the southern part of the island. On April 18th, 1942, Colonel James Doolittle is going to lead a group of bombers to Tokyo and other Japanese cities with the intent to drop firebombs on these cities. And it basically is supposed to help restore confidence to the American troops who were suffering very poorly in the Pacific region. We hadn't really seen much success. And so the Doolittle raids, as they're called, are supposed to help boost that confidence and to actually make us feel like we're doing something, that we're accomplishing something, that we're blackening Japan's eyes kind of thing. Well, with the Doolittle raids, Japan is going to have to rethink its strategy because they also now realize that they have to protect their own home cities, not just constantly go out and attack us. So the battle will continue in various different parts of the Pacific. May 4th through the 8th, will be the Battle of the Coral Sea. Japan had made plans to invade the country of Australia. And so the Battle of the Coral Sea will take place just outside of Australia. It's an early turning point in the war, but it's not the final one. It's not one that's going to be a definite change of tide. But what we do see is new fighting techniques that will be utilized in this battle. It is a naval battle, so it's fought with ships, but these ships never face each other directly. Instead, the fighting is done mostly with planes that are launched from aircraft carriers. The opposing ships never see each other, and they never exchange fire. The Battle of the Coral Sea sort of ends up like a Japanese victory, kind of. The Allies lose more ships than the Japanese, but the Japanese were unable to obtain their objective, which was to invade Australia. The Japanese had to turn around and go back home because they were short on fuel. So it's kind of their victory, but in a way it's kind of not as well. June 3rd through the 6th, we'll see the Battle of Midway, and this again is a naval confrontation. The Japanese are going to send 110 ships to take over Midway, which was an American territory, and from there their plan was to launch an attack on Hawaii and take the Hawaiian island chain. The U.S. is outnumbered in this battle 4-1, but we know that the Japanese are coming, and so we wait for them. We're able to lay in wait and surprise attack them. The U.S. is going to lose an aircraft carrier called the Yorktown, but the Japanese will lose 4 aircraft carriers and some of their best pilots. And it's during this battle that the Americans truly feel that they have been avenged for Pearl Harbor, that we finally got the Japanese back. And so that is going to start making a change in how we fight this battle from now on.